Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us for this installment of the REPI Institute's seminar series. This week, we are joined by Dr. Ram Jakhu, who will be giving us a lecture entitled Rule of Law or Rule by Force in Outer Space. So before we begin, we're going to have my colleague and fellow graduate student, Kong, introduce the speaker. So Kong, if you're here.
So Dr. Jakhu is a technical professor at the Institute of the Air and Space Law, Faculty of Law, McGill University, Montreal, in Canada. For the last 4 decades, he has been teaching and conducting research in international space law and public international law. He holds serious positions, including director of the McGill Institute of Air and Space Law, and the first director of the Master of Space Studies program of the International Space University French. So, yeah, we're pretty glad we have Professor Jakhu join our meeting today. So, Professor Jakhu, so what topic we are going to talk about today, please?
All right. Thank you very much. First of all, I'd like to express my gratitude to your institute for inviting me to this talk. So what I intend to do is just again for people who are not fully familiar with space in general, I have a sort of introduction. What are the benefits of exploration and use of outer space? So that gives us the context. What is here at stake in the whole thing? And then we'll look into what is the legal regime is, space governance system, laws and policies and regulations, things like, and what are the challenges. So I have selected 3 areas. There are many, but I selected 3 areas. First thing, increasing space debris, which threatens everybody's space activities, and also the exploration and exploitation of natural resources of the moon and other celestial bodies, and militarization and weaponization. So the idea is to see what are the challenges, what are the problem areas, what are the issues which are emerging, which is threatening international peace and security, and then we will have questions and answers. So with that in mind, so let's look at that. First thing is, it's very clear that everybody in the world, I will say 95%, if 90% people use space for all sorts of things, cellular phones and navigation, banking, weather forecasting, disaster monitoring, agriculture, military operations. All those things are becoming more dependent on space. Moreover, space industry is a catalyst for almost other major industries. Take the example of aviation, or I mentioned banking. So space is really an important domain for human lives or our civilization. Let's go through very quickly. Now, in the industry itself is about $370 billion annually, but that is but I see it's expected to grow exponentially. By 2040, it is expected it will become a $1 trillion industry itself. And this is the kind of thing space is used for communication purposes from different Earth stations and ground segment, and cloud, internet, and all kind of computers. So you see the satellite up there, it connects all kind of things, airplanes, ships, ambulances, houses, helicopters, rescue return, all kind of things. Space or satellite is connecting and providing very important information, important communications. And then we have quite a few companies which are emerging and trying to establish broadband communications. Of course, SpaceX company is Starlink is perhaps the most important one or more active one, but the others are also becoming very, very active. There are going to be hundreds and thousands of satellites launched in near future, to the level of SpaceX is talking about, 30 to 40,000 satellites, and a company in Rwanda is talking about 300 satellites, 300,000 satellites in low Earth orbit. So there all other companies are in the middle. So number of satellites will be launched in a very near future. So then satellites also help us to help or monitor emergencies and disasters, also to help the victims of earthquakes. The satellites play a very important role in that humanitarian, that type of humanitarian causes. And of course, satellites are providing very useful information to military operation. Here's the example of Russian military buildup in Ukraine. And this is another picture from the same area. Tells you what is being bombarded, what are the damages which is being caused, and also for Starlink, which is a private company, American company, which is providing service to Ukrainians with respect to targeting the information on the ground. All those things are very important. These are important tasks which are being carried out with the use of satellites. Satellites are indispensable for weather forecasting, monitoring of climate change, and also search and rescue operations. And of course, this is a new industry which is emerging, space travel or space tourism. And then a little bit in the future, in that Moon and other planets can provide very important minerals. Of course, in addition to minerals, oxygen, water, methane, helium are also equally important, which are available on these planets, and they can be explored and exploited and brought back to Earth. And then we go to even a big satellites launching in outer space can help us collecting energy from the sun and beam it to Earth and provide or meet our energy needs. This is a little bit futuristic, but my guess is in 15, 20 years, this you will be seeing these kind of satellite system in place. So in brief, without satellites, our daily lives on planet Earth would be chaotic at best and catastrophic at worst. So that is the state of affairs we have. So we are that much dependent on space. But also we must not forget that without appropriate rules-based space order law, indispensable benefits from space, international peace, security, stability, and justice for all will be in jeopardy. So two things: indispensable space and indispensable legal order. So what is that order? Very quickly, what are the basic rules of the road? What are the rules which need to be or have been established but must be applied and implemented by nation states? So first thing is we should keep in mind, which is normally reported, I shouldn't say normally, regularly reported, at least in North America, that war in space is inevitable. To me, that's wrong. War in space is not inevitable. Secondly, outer space is not Wild West. There are rules of law which are in place, which must be respected even when you conduct war in space. First thing is important. War on Earth, war on space, rules are in place. So there exists numerous international principles, rules, and treaties which are applicable to all space activities, including military space activities. Militaries are not out of the legal regime. I'll elaborate that point later on. Second thing, when you talk about international law, international space law, we should keep in mind international space law is a part of general international law. So to understand rules and regulations applicable to space, we have to look at not only space law, but general international law, telecommunication law, international environmental law, international humanitarian law. Those are different branches of law which provide basic principles, specify basic principles which govern the conduct of space activities, including military space activities. Purely space treaties have been adopted since 60s. These are 5 treaties: Outer Space Treaty, which is the most important treaty to which US and Canada are party, and the 1968 Rescue and Return Agreement deals with the provision to provide assistance to astronauts in case they have to crash land, if they crash land on Earth. And Liability Convention, which provides the provision with respect to if damage is caused by space object, who is responsible, who should pay compensation. Registration Convention talks about all spacecrafts, space objects sent in space must be registered, like we register cars. And then is the Moon Treaty, in the US you call Moon Treaties, Moon Agreement, which provides with respect to exploration and exploitation of natural resources of the moon and other planets. In addition to these 5 treaties, there are other treaties, which, for example, the Charter of the United Nations, Partial Test Ban Treaty, and the 1979 Edmond Treaty, which prohibits the military uses of military activities with which you can modify the environment. And then, of course, the ITU Constitution and Convention. ITU is the International Telecommunication Union Constitution and Convention. So one must keep in mind these space activities are carried out with the use of highly advanced technologies, complex technologies, and those activities are meeting earthly needs. Earthly needs involve economic, political, strategic, social, cultural needs relevant to policy. So one must have a good understanding of all those aspects to fully understand the legal regime of governing space, including military space activities. So let's look at the most fundamental principles, very basic principles of law which are applicable. The first, of course, is everybody is free for exploration and use of outer space. Now, that is general statement, but that there should not be discrimination of any kind, and that freedom must be exercised on the basis of equality. The freedom is also to explore, freedom to explore and use outer space shall be for peaceful purposes and for the common interest of all mankind. And the benefits and use of outer space must be made available to other countries, irrespective of their degree of economic and scientific development. So that means space is for everybody. International law in general and UN Charter they are applicable, and for the purpose of maintaining international peace and security and promoting international cooperation and understanding. Now, when you carry on space activity, you must pay due regard to the interests of other countries. If I'm doing it, I must make sure that you have also right to use outer space. So I must not ignore your interests. So that's, again, one of the fundamental principles of international law. And then this freedom is not available or cannot be misused or abused. And then, as mentioned earlier, outer space is not subject to national appropriation by any means. You cannot just go and start owning land on the moon or start saying this area belongs to me. No, that is a prohibited. And that's a major change in international law. So That's what, and top of that, and I will say in general, so the legal regime is such that it strikes a fair balance between the interest of all states, developing countries, space powers and non-space powers. That fair balance must be maintained to maintain international peace and security. But I say that let's talk about three areas very quickly. What are the challenges? They are numerous, but I concentrate on three areas of challenges. Let's look at space debris first. Starting in 1957 to say 2022, humanity has launched so many satellites and dumped so much junk in space that we have already reached a tipping point. Tipping point is that even if tomorrow no satellite is launched, the debris will keep on increasing. Let me repeat, it's very important to keep in mind. Tomorrow we stop sending one satellite. No satellite is sent. Even then, space debris will keep on increasing, what is called due to what is called, Kessler syndrome. That the pieces will start or have already started colliding each other and creating more junk. And these pieces travel with high speed, and they can cause serious damage. A small piece, the size of a corn flake, which you eat in breakfast, can kill an astronaut or damage a satellite. There are hundreds and thousands of pieces which are already floating. Some may come, those are close to Earth, may come down to the atmosphere and crash the atmosphere and die. Some will survive, they fall on Earth, but they will be remaining in space for decades or even centuries. It all depends where they are. So that's a major problem. So to see how from 1960s, how we have gone up to 2018 and even 2020, the number of pieces is increasing exponentially. And this is, you see, almost 30-degree increase, that space debris is not decreasing. It's increasing and will continue increasing. So these pieces, I say, have started falling on Earth. This is just example of 4 pieces, but there are several other pieces which have fallen on Earth and will be falling on Earth. And here, even radioactive material has come back to Earth and damaged certain areas in northern part of Canada. One person was also injured because of the falling debris. So these are some examples, but the point to be kept in mind is space debris is going to increase, will be causing damage in Earth orbit and causing damage on Earth. The leaders of industrial countries recognized last year that space environment is becoming crowded. That is recognition, but it doesn't really matter, recognize or not. That is the fact which has been known for the last 20 or 30 years. But the question is, what can be done? What is, I will say, what is being done? I will say, with I think full facts in mind, I would say very little is being done. So that means space debris problem is becoming serious and threatens sustainability of space, all space activities of all states. Okay, let's go to the next one. Exploitation of space resources. We humans have been started producing more humans exponentially. Starting 1580, that's about 500 years ago, you see where we are going. All the space. We are already here about 8 billion people. By the end of the century, it is expected we will be having over 10 billion people on this planet. So more people need more resources. At the same time, humanity consumes more than what the Earth can produce. There's a deficit of 50%. So we need 1.5 planets to sustain life we have it. We are consuming so much that there is a real serious deficit in the resources available to Earth, to all of us. And that's why there's a search for resources in outer space. And the scarcity of resources on Earth will dictate and inspire us to go to space and look for the resources. And it is believed that the resources on the moon and asteroids are promising, right? Now, this is a kind of thing what you find on the moon. You see water, as I mentioned earlier, helium, rare earth metals, which are very important metals, and all kind of things you can find on the moon. So what is the current law on the exploration and exploitation of natural resources? Here is one treaty, which is called Outer Space Treaty, as mentioned earlier, just has been ratified by 112 states. And one provision is that it says the outer space, including the moon and other celestial bodies, is not subject to national appropriation by claim of sovereignty, by means of use or occupation or any other means. So there's a clear prohibition of appropriation, ownership in outer space and the moon. And I'll get to the point of the problem in that, how this particular provision is being interpreted, currently by some states. Let's just take the example of the US. US says this Article 2 does not cover natural resources. There's no mention of natural resources here. So natural resources can be appropriated. So that understanding of the US of Article 2 has been put into national law. And 2015, the US law says the natural resources of the moon can be appropriated, because in the view of the US, natural resources are not prohibited to be appropriated. And then 2020, US says outer space is not a global common. It doesn't belong to everybody. So that can be appropriated. And same year, 2 years ago, it initiated what is called Artemis Accords, and Principle 10 will say the signatories, which are about 21 space agencies and governments, believe that extraction of space resources does not inherently constitute national appropriation under Article 2 of the Outer Space Treaty. And then these signatories of these accords say that some safety zone can be established. In my view, or view of a number of other authors and some governments, these provisions are contradicting the provisions of the Outer Space Treaty. Now, the battle for the moon is emerging. That's for sure. As you see, the race is going on towards exploration and use of exploitation of natural resources, and mainly because geopolitical and commercial reasons, national laws are being adopted and authorizing private companies to invest and undertake commercial exploitation of resources. These laws have been passed by US, Luxembourg, UAE, and Japan. We should keep in mind no unilateral imposition of legal regime, imposition by these 4 countries, and there may be other countries, regime governing exploitation of natural resources will be without challenge. We should keep in mind the views of these 4 states are not going to be accepted by everybody, and are not being accepted and will not be accepted in future. So there's going to be conflict. There could be challenge. There's one example only recently. China and the US are looking at the sites on the moon, same sites for their operations. Say, well, we want to explore this area. The others say, yes, we want to explore this area. This is just a starting of conflicts. difference of opinion, conflict, and that is going to be very serious matter. Keep in mind, the colonization in 15th, 16th century started with the efforts to go explore and exploit the resources of other lands. So you can see somewhat repetition of the colonizing process which happened 300, 400, 500 years ago. Okay, so let's look at the military operations, space militarization and weaponization, what is happening. Here is who is spending how much on military space activity. US is quite ahead of everybody, and then Russia and China and other countries, even to the level of Vietnam. So almost everybody is spending money on the militarization of space or using space for military purposes. These are different applications of space for military purposes. You got a communication, you got early warning of detonation of nuclear bombs or nuclear devices, intelligence, who is doing what, to see that, to navigation for your missiles, and jamming in case you need to jam signals of your enemies or other entities. And you got conventional weapons, nuclear weapons, you got laser weapons and space weapons. You put a weapon in space and explode, destroy everything. These applications are not part of science fiction. This is very important to keep in mind. These applications are being made of space technologies, are being developed, I will say fast. And then, of course, you've got weapons to destroy other satellites, which are called anti-satellite weapons, ASATs. Russians and Chinese, or Soviets and Americans have been conducting that test in 60s, 70s, up to 80s. And then in 2007, Chinese tested its own weapon. And then 2018, the American want to show the Chinese, hey, don't forget, we also have the capability. We don't use it now, but we have the capability. And then came India. India destroys its own satellite. And then last year, Russian destroyed another satellite, making sure that everybody knows that they have capability. So these are capable weapons which have been perfected, are being perfected, and they can be used or have been tested in that way. So so this club of 4 is going to be joined by other countries. So any other country comes up and tests its weapon in space, one should not be surprised. So what are the trends? The trends are the number of satellites using military is increasing. Aggressive and extensive militarization is underway. And civilian satellites are being used for military purposes. A race is going on to augment war-fighting capabilities, which we have seen in case of Iraq war and Afghanistan war, and now Ukrainian war. Satellites are helping the armed forces. And also the new forces in the US Space Force has been established. Rules for fighting war are being written and games are being conducted. Exercises are being carried out with respect to use of weapons in space. Now, this is what we see only a week ago. Russia said that it can target the US commercial satellite that helped Ukraine. These satellites, so we belong to what we have seen, American companies, and they could be legitimate target for retaliatory purpose. And US on the same day say, well, warn Russia, hey, don't do that. If you do that, if you attack our satellites belonging to our private companies, and you will, those kind of attacks will be met with the they will be met with the force. So we should keep in mind, which is what has been said by International Committee of Red Cross, saying that the human cost of using weapons in outer space that could disrupt, damage, destroy, or disable civilian or dual-use space object is likely to be significant. I think the word significant is somewhat not very strong. I will say is going to be devastating. And that is going to be affecting not something out in space, but here on Earth. Just imagine the satellites are destroyed, which provides you communication. So you won't be in a position to use your cell phones. You may not be in a position to withdraw money. The airlines might not be in a position to fly. By the way, if you are interested, you should look at and search for on Google. There's a short video, very good, a day without satellites. Then we'll see what happens in case we lose satellites in space. So we should also war on Earth will be war in space, and peace on Earth can be peace in space. So what are the basic principles of law? First, and perhaps the most important principle is a prohibition of use of force. All 193 members of the United Nations have undertaken to refrain in their international relations from the threat or use of force against other states. So this principle is considered to be very important, has become part of customary international law. And according to this author, Bonnelly says, subsequent state practice leaves little room for doubt that it was understood to be prohibited for substantial use of force. And also under declaration, which has been adopted by UN General Assembly, it says war of aggression constitutes a war of aggression constitutes a crime against the peace. And that is why United Nations in March this year adopted a resolution condemning the Russian attack against Ukraine. No use of force. But that's the rule. But what are the justifications for use? There are new justifications which are being concocted, or the current law is being interpreted in such a way the countries start expanding their justification for using force. One of the most exception, which has been recognized in Article 51 of the UN Charter, it says that the Charter does not impair the inherent right of individual or collective self-defense if an armed attack occurs against a member of the United Nations until the Security Council has taken measures necessary to maintain international peace and security. Now, here is very important. States have inherent right of individual collective self-defense. But that right is available only if an armed attack has occurred. If there's no armed attacks, you have no right of self-defense. And also you have right of self-defense until the Security Council of the United Nations takes charge of that situation. So your right of self-defense must stop when the Security Council become in charge of the situation. And also, if you exercise your right of self-defense, you must immediately report, as a state, you must report to the Security Council. That is the law, which is clear, at least to me and to a number of authors and states, but some countries use or interpret this prohibition to meet their national interests or to have their own interpretation of this. One of the interpretation was advanced by United States when US with its allied or its friendly countries attack Iraq. The idea was that Iraq was developing weapons of mass destruction, so a preventive action must be taken. So states are entitled to exercise or take preventive measures before armed attack occurs. But what happens, according to the US report, no weapons of mass destruction was found. So what happened? So this is the risk for exercising so-called a right of anticipatory or preventive self-defense. In essence, prohibition of use of force is shrinking. At the same time, justification for use of force are being expanded. But there have been some very successful stories. That means there are a number of treaties which have been very successful. Take the example, 1963 treaty, which prohibits the conduct of nuclear tests in atmosphere and in space. States undertook not to conduct their nuclear weapon tests in atmosphere and outer space. And then in 1979, states have undertaken not to engage in any military or other hostile use of environmental modification techniques, not to modify environment for military purposes. And then ITU Constitution and Convention says that states must exercise their jurisdiction and ensure that radio frequencies by its public and private entities do not cause harmful interference to the radio stations of other states. These three examples, and there are other examples, have been very successful. There are no serious violations of these treaties. So the point I'm trying to make is there are treaties. That means international law can, and should work. Okay, and that is why number of efforts have been made with respect to control arms race in space, and started with missile technology control regime, which restrict the proliferation of missiles, and the Hague Code of Conduct also try to control the proliferation of ballistic missiles. Then you get the China-Russia treaty or draft treaty, which requires the states not to place in orbit any type of weapons. This resolution calls upon states to contribute actively to the objective of peaceful use of outer space and for prevention of arms race in outer space. And there have been resolutions which states have undertaken not to place weapons in outer space. And recently, UN has adopted, has initiated the discussion on a resolution on reducing space threats through norms, rules, and principles. The tragedy is none of these initiatives, efforts have been successful, as they had not been successful. And then, last year, Chinese tested a hypersonic missile. And the US say, well, this is very bad. It is so serious or so threatening to the United States. It is like Soviet Union launched its Sputnik. And the US felt threatened by Sputnik at that time. Now, US feels threatened by hypersonic missile test by China. The Chinese say, well, this is nothing new. This is a fractional orbital bombardment system, which US has been, possesses those kind of system. The Chinese are doing that. So a kind of neutral opinion by Laura Grego is that none of these technologies new. This has been done before. But again, she also admitted that a nuclear arms race is on, and there's nothing serious effort. There's no serious effort being made to stop that war. Now, what we at Miguel has been doing is we're trying to draft a manual called a Manual on International Law Applicable to Military Uses of Outer Space, called MILAMOS, or we call Miguel Manual. But I have been alluding to the point that a number of states and authors start giving their own interpretation of the treaties with a view to find excuses to go outside the treaties or interpret the treaties to serve their national interests. So consequently, there arises confusion, ambiguity, uncertainty regarding the legal regime governing outer space. And we believe, as I said earlier, war in space is not inevitable. That means war can be avoided with or under international law. And I gave you 3 examples earlier, which are the treaties which have been very successful. So that means clarification of existing law is of vital importance for understanding, identification of gap, and improvements in the system. So we have collected about 100 experts from around the world, and these experts came from governments, military, academic institutions, civil society. They all worked in their personal capacity. And we follow a process which is democratic, but we are independent, neutral, objective, and international. And the rules we have adopted or drafted, they have been adopted by consensus, and they are all based on the information from primary sources. We have not taken into consideration the views of any author. So our mission was to develop a manual that objectively articulates and clarifies existing international law applicable to military uses of outer space in time of peace, including times of rising tensions. So we have not covered the period of a period of armed conflict. We believe this clarified set of rules will dissuade the actual use of force and avoid future conflicts. This is just our wish, we believe that. So we have already published volume 1, which contains 52 rules, and here is the title that is available online free of charge. You may like to download that. We are working on volume 2, which will be published in 2023, next year with the commentaries. So summary, conclusion, my final remarks. We have seen that number of space activities and actors is increasing or will be increasing exponentially. Space utilization for peaceful purposes is critical to humanity's economic progress, long-term sustainability, and even survival. So far, the existing system, legal system, worked well. There are challenges, but worked well. However, some states, which I tried to point out earlier, and there are other examples, and they have started ignoring or taking actions contrary to the law. But we have also seen trends. More countries are using or planning to use space for military purposes. More aggressive militarization, space militarization is taking place. And more use of civilian satellites for military purpose there, and there's a trend toward from space militarization, space weaponization. And I said it earlier, the prohibition of use of force is shrinking and justification for use of force are being expanded. International community, I think humanity, you and me, we are facing a serious challenge in maintaining space for peaceful purposes. That is needed in order to serve inclusive interests of whole mankind and controlling national efforts for exclusive space control or space dominance. Challenges to peaceful uses of outer space have already started emerging. In my view, it's very important to maintain a delicate balance between the interests of spacefaring nations and other nations, between developed and developing countries. And there should be a rules-based order which will be indispensable to achieve international peace, security, stability, and justice for all. There is an urgent need for this order to be strengthened, expanded. We should keep in mind absence or weakness of rule of law gives rise to the law of the jungle, dominance by one, use of force. War in space, if and when occurs, would result in unprecedented devastation affecting the entire humanity, and there will be no winners. International law applicable to outer space, which must be understood and studied from neutral perspective and applied effectively. This is necessary to hold the rule of law to avoid the use of force in outer space, not only to maintain international peace and security, but also to assure unprecedented benefits of outer space to the entire humanity. This is clock you must have already seen. We are very close to Doomsday. We are only about 100 seconds away. That's the state of affairs. That is the challenge humanity faces today. Now, this somebody brought to my attention this morning. I thought I should share with you. This is a statement made by somebody who wanted to be the president of the University of Florida. Yesterday, he made this statement in the context of what you and I are discussing here in the university. And it says a healthy university must challenge young men and women with the new and even uncomfortable ideas. A healthy university must embrace debate. A healthy university will welcome complicated truths and explore eye-opening perspective. A healthy university will challenge assumptions and consider alternatives. Those are necessary for learning new things, for our education, for our well-being, for our survival. With that, I stop, and I thank you very much for your attention.